Hello, everyone. Let's get ready to read. Anyway, welcome back. I am happy with this setup, and nothing new is going to change, so I have nothing to apologize for this time. So let's just go ahead and get started. We're on page 240. Getting closer to the end. People were streaming through the streets. Most of them were chasing trolleys. Most of the trolleys were full of whatever people had found a trolley useful to carry. Firewood, children, shopping. And they were no longer dodging, but moving blindly, all in the same direction. You could stop a trolley by turning it over, when its wheels spun madly and uselessly. The wizard saw a number of enthusiastic individuals trying to smash them, but the trolleys were practically indestructible. They bent but didn't break, and if they had even one wheel left, they'd make a valiant attempt to keep going. "Look at that one," said the Arch-Chancellor. "It's got my laundry in it! My actual laundry! Darn that for a lark!" He pushed his way through the crowds and rammed his staff over the trolley's wheels, toppling it over. "We can't get a clear shot at anything with all these civilians around," complained the dean. "There's hundreds of trolleys," said the lecturer in recent runes. "It's just like vermin." "Get away from me, you basket!" Or maybe vermine. Vermine are small black and white rodents found in the Ramtop Mountains. They are ancestors of the lemming, which is, as is well known, throws itself over cliffs and drowns in lakes on a regular basis. Vermine used to do that too. The point is, though, that dead animals don't breed, and over the millennia, more and more vermine were descendants of those vermine who, when faced with a cliff edge, squeaked the rodent equivalent of "blow that" for a game of soldiers. Vermine now abseil down cliffs and build small boats to cross lakes. When their rush leads them to search shore, they sit around avoiding one another's gaze for a while, then leave early to get home before the rush. He flailed at an importunate trolley with his staff. The tide of wheeled baskets was flowing out of the city. The struggling humans gradually dropped out or fell under the wobbling wheels. Only the wizards stayed in the flowing tide, shouting at one another and attacking the silvery swarm with their staves. It wasn't that magic didn't work. It worked quite well. A good zap could turn a trolley into 1,000 intricate little wire puzzles. But what good did that do? A moment later, two others would trundle over their stricken sibling. Around the dean, trolleys were being splashed into metal droplets. "He's really getting the hang of it, isn't he?" said the senior wrangler, as he and the bursar levered yet another basket onto its back. "He's certainly saying yo a lot," said the bursar. The dean himself didn't know when he'd been happier. For 60 years he'd been obeying all the self-regulating rules of wizardry, and suddenly he was having the time of his life. He'd never realized that deep down inside, what he really wanted to do was make things go splat. Fire leapt from the tip of his staff. Handles and bits of wire and pathetically spinning wheels tinkled down around him. And what made it even better was that there was no end to the targets. A second wave of trolleys, crammed into a tighter space, was trying to advance over the tops of those still in actual contact with the ground. It wasn't working, but they were trying anyway. And trying desperately because a third wave was already crunching and smashing its way over the top of them. Except you couldn't use the word trying. It suggested some sort of conscious effort, some sort of possibility that there might also be a state of not trying. Something about the relentless movement, the way they crushed one another in their surge, suggested that the wire baskets had as much choice in the matter as water has about flowing downhill. "Yo!" shouted the dean. Raw magic smacked into the grinding tangle of metal. It rained wheels. "Eat hot thaumaters, the dean began. "Don't swear! Don't swear!" shouted Ridcully above the noise. He tried to swat a silly bugger that was orbiting his hat. "There's no telling what it might turn into." "Bother!" screamed the dean. "It's no good. We might as well be trying to hold back the sea," said the senior wrangler. "I vote we head back to the university and pick up some really tough spells." "Good idea," said Ridcully. He looked up at the advancing wall of twisted wire. "Any idea how?" he said. "Yo, scallywag!" said the dean. He aimed his staff again. It made a sad little noise that, if it was written down, could only be spelled pfft. A feeble spark fell off the end and onto the cobbles. Wendell Poon slammed another book shut. The librarian winced. Nothing! Volcanoes, tidal waves, wrath of gods, meddling wizards. I don't want to know how other cities had been killed. I want to know how they ended. The librarian stacked another pile of books on the reading desk. Another plus about being dead. Wendell was finding an ability with languages. He could see the sense in the words without knowing the actual meaning. Being dead wasn't like falling asleep after all. It was like waking up. He glanced across the library to where Lupin was having his paw bandaged. Librarian, he said softly. Ook? You've changed species in your time. What would you do if, for the sake of argument, you found a couple of people who, suppose there was a wolf that changed into a wolfman at the full moon, and a woman that changed into a wolf woman at full moon, approaching the same shape but from opposite directions, and they'd met. Well, what do you tell them? Do you let them sort it out for themselves? Ook, said the librarian instantly. It's tempting. Ook. This cake wouldn't like it, though. Eek, ook. You're right. You could have put it a little less coarsely, but you're right. Everyone has to sort things out for themselves. He sighed, turned the page. His eyes widened. The City of Conley, he said. Ever heard of it? What's this book? Stripfiddle's Believe It or Not Grimoire. Says here, little carts. None knew from where they came. Of such great use, men were employed to herd them and bring them into the city. Of a sudden, I got into a rush of creatures. Men followed them, and behold, there was a new city outside the walls. A city as of merchants' booths wherein carts ran. He turned the page. It seems to say... Still haven't understood it properly, he told himself. One-man bucket thinks we're talking about the breeding of cities. That doesn't feel right. A city is alive. Supposing you were a great slow giant, like a counting pine, and looked down at a city... You'd see buildings grow. You'd see attackers driven off. You'd see fires put out. You'd see the city was alive, but you wouldn't see people. Because they'd move too fast. The life of a city, the thing that drives it, isn't some sort of mysterious force. The life is a city of people. He turned the pages absently, not really looking. So we have the cities, big sedentary creatures growing from one spot and hardly moving at all for thousands of years. They breed by sending out people to colonize new land. They themselves just lie there. They're alive, but only in the same way that jellyfish is alive. Or a fairly bright vegetable. After all, we call Ankh-Morpork the Big Wahoonie. And where you get big, slow living things, you get small, fast things that eat them. Wendell Poons felt the brain cells firing. Connections were made. Thought gushed along new channels. Had he ever really thought properly when he was alive? He doubted it. He'd just been a lot of complicated reactions attached to a lot of nerve endings, with everything from idle rumination about the next meal to random, distracting memories getting between him and real thought. It'd grow inside the city, where it's warm and protected, and then it'd break out outside the city and build something, not a real city, a false city, that pulls people, the life, out of the host. The word we're looking for here is predator. The dean stared at his staff in disbelief. He gave it a shake and aimed again. This time the sound would have been a pooft. He looked up. A curling wave of trolleys, rooftop high, was poised to fall on him. Oh, shucks, he said, and folded his arms over his head. Someone grabbed the back of his robe and pulled him away as the trolleys crashed down. Come on, said Ridcully. If we run, we can keep ahead of them. I'm out of magic! I'm out of magic, moaned the dean. You'll be out of a lot more if you don't hurry, said the Arch-Chancellor. Trying to keep together, bumping into one another, the wizards staggered ahead of the trolleys. Streams of them were surging out of the city and across the fields. Know what this reminds me of? Said Ridcully as they fought their way through. Do tell, muttered the senior wrangler. Salmon Run, said the Arch-Chancellor. What? Not in the Ankh, of course, said Ridcully. I don't reckon salmon could get upstream in our river. Unless it walked, said the senior wrangler. But I've seen 'em thick as milk in some rivers, said Ridcully. Fighting to get ahead. The whole river just a mass of silver. Fine, fine, said the senior wrangler. What did they do that for? Well, it's all to do with breeding. Disgusting. And I think we have to drink water, said the senior wrangler. Right, we're in the open now, and this is where we outflank 'em, said Ridcully. We'll just aim for a clear space, and... I don't think so, said the lecturer in recent runes. Every direction was filled with an advancing, grinding, fighting wall of trolleys. They're coming to get us! They're coming to get us! Said the bursar. The dean snatched his staff. Hey, that's mine! The dean pushed him away and blew off the wheels of the leading trolley. That's my staff! The wizard stood back in the narrowing ring of metal. They're not right for this city, said the lecturer in recent runes. I know what you mean, said Ridcully. Alien. I suppose no one's got a flying spell on them today, the senior wrangler inquired. The dean took aim again and melted a basket. That's my staff you're using, you know. Shut up, bursar, said the arch-chancellor. And Dean, you're getting nowhere picking them off one by one like that. Okay, lads? We want to do them all as much damage as possible. Remember, wild, uncontrolled bursts. The trolleys advanced. Ow! Ow! Miss Flitworth staggered through the wet, rattling gloom. Hailstones crunched underfoot. Thunder cannonaded around the sky. They sting, don't they? She said. They echo. Bildor fielded a stook as it was blown past and stacked it with the others. Miss Flitworth scuttled past him, bent double under a load of corn. And this is another footnote. The ability of skinny old ladies to carry huge loads is phenomenal. Studies have shown that an ant can carry 100 times its own weight, but there is no known limit to the lifting power of the average tiny 80-year-old Spanish peasant grandmother. The two of them worked steadily, crisscrossing the field in the teeth of the storm to snatch up the harvest before the wind and hail stole it away. Lightning flickered around the sky. It wasn't a normal storm. It was war. It's going to pour rain in a minute, screamed Miss Flitworth above the noise. We'll never get it to the barn. Go and fetch the tarpaulin or something. That'll do for tonight. Bildor nodded and ran through the squelching darkness toward the farm building. Lightning was striking so many times around the fields the air itself was sizzling, and Corona danced along the top of the hedge. And there was death. He saw it looming ahead of him, a crouched skeletal shape poised to spring, its robe flapping and rattling behind it in the wind. Tightness gripped him, trying to force him to run while at the same time rooting him to the spot. It invaded his mind and froze there, blocking all thought save for the innermost tiny voice which said, quite calmly, So this is terror. Then death vanished as the lightning glow faded, reappeared as a fresh arc was struck on the next hill. Then the quiet, internal voice added, But why doesn't it move? Bildor let himself inch forward slightly. There was no response from the hunched thing. Then it dawned on him that the thing on the other side of the hedge was only a robed assemblage of ribs and femurs and vertebrae if viewed from one point of view, but if looked at slightly differently, was equally just a complexity of sparging arms and reciprocating levers which had been covered by a tarpaulin which was now blowing off. The combination harvester was in front of him. Bildor grinned horribly. Un-Bildor thoughts rose up in his mind. He stepped forward. The wall of trolleys surrounded the wizards. The last flare from the staff melted a hole, which was instantly filled up by more trolleys. Ridcully turned to his fellow wizards. They were red in the face, their robes were torn. Several over-enthusiastic shots had resulted in singed beards and burnt hats. They thought feverishly. I think I can remember one, said the bursar, hesitantly. Go on, man, anything's worth trying at a time like this. The bursar stretched out a hand. He shut his eyes. He muttered a few syllables under his breath. There was a brief flicker of octarine light, and... Oh, said the Arch-Chancellor. And that's, all of it? Eringia's surprising bouquet, said the bursar, bright-eyed and twitching. I don't know why, but it's one I've always been able to do. Just a knack, I suppose. Ridcully eyed the huge bunch of flowers now gripped in the bursar's fist. But not, I venture to point out, entirely useful at this time, he added. The bursar looked at the approaching walls and his smile faded. I suppose not, he said. Anyone else got any ideas? Said Ridcully. There was no reply. Nice roses, though, said the Dean. That was quick, said Miss Flitworth when Bill Dorr arrived at the pile of stooks, dragging a tarpaulin behind him. Yes, wasn't it? He mumbled non-committally as she helped him drag it over the stack and weigh it down with stones. The wind caught at it and tried to drag it out of his hands. It might as well have tried to blow a mountain over. Rain swept over the fields among shreds of the mist that shimmered with blue electric energies. Never known a night like this, Miss Flitworth said. There was another crack of thunder. Sheet lightning fluttered around the horizon. Miss Flitworth clutched Bill Dorr's arm. Isn't that a figure on the hill? She said. I thought I saw a shape. No, it's merely a mechanical contrivance. There was another flash. On a horse? Said Miss Flitworth. The third sheet sheared across the sky, and this time there was no doubt about it. There was a mounted figure on the nearest hilltop, hooded, holding a scythe as proudly as a lance. Posing. Bill Dorr turned towards Miss Flitworth. Posing! I never did anything like that. Why do anything like that? What purpose does it serve? He opened his palm. The gold timer appeared. How much longer have you got? Perhaps an hour. Perhaps minutes. Come on, then. Bill Dorr remained where he was, looking at the timer. I said, come on! It won't work. I was wrong to think that it would, but it won't. There's some things that you cannot escape. You cannot live forever. Why not? Bill Dorr looked shocked. What do you mean? Why can't you live forever? I don't know. Cosmic wisdom? What does cosmic wisdom know about it? Now, will you come on? The figure on the hill hadn't moved. The rain had turned the dust into a fine mud. They slithered down the slope and hurried across the yard into the house. I should have prepared more. I had plans. There was the harvest. Yes. Is there any way we can barricade the doors or something? Do you know what you are saying? Well, think of something. Didn't anything ever work against you? No, said Bill Dorr, with a tiny touch of pride. Miss Flitworth peered out the window and then flung herself dramatically against the wall on one side of it. He's gone! It, said Bill Dorr. It won't be a he yet. It's gone. It could be anywhere. It can come through the wall. She darted forward and then glared at him. Very well. Fetch the child. I think we should leave here. A thought struck him. He brightened up a bit. We do have some time. What is the hour? I don't know. You go around stopping the clocks the whole time. But it is not yet midnight. I shouldn't think it's more than 11:15. Then we have 3/4 of an hour. How can you be sure? Because of drama, Miss Flitworth. The kind of death who poses against the skyline and gets lit up by lightning flashes, said Bill Dorr disapprovingly. Doesn't turn up at 11:20 if he can possibly turn up at midnight. She nodded, white-faced, and disappeared upstairs. After a minute or two she returned, with Sal wrapped up in a blanket. She's still fast asleep, she said. That's not sleep. The rain had stopped, but the storm still marched around the hills. The air sizzled, still seemed oven-hot. Bill Dorr led the way past the henhouse, where Cyril and his elderly harem were crouched back in the darkness, all trying to occupy the same few inches of perch. There was a pale green glow hovering around the farmhouse chimney. We call that Mother Carey's fire, said Miss Flitworth. It's an omen. An omen of what? What? No, don't ask me. Just an omen, I suppose. Just basic, omenery. Where are we going? Into the town. To be near the scythe? Yes. He disappeared into the barn. After a while, he came out leading Binky, saddled and harnessed. He mounted up and leaned down and pulled both her and the sleeping child onto the horse in front of him. If I'm wrong, he added, this horse will take you wherever you want to go. I shan't want to go anywhere except back home. Wherever. Binky broke into a trot as they turned onto the road to town. Wind blew the leaves off the trees, which tumbled past them and up on the road. The occasional flash of lightning still hissed across the sky. Miss Flitworth looked at the hill beyond the farm. Bill! I know. It's there again. I know. Why isn't it chasing us? We're safe until the sand runs out. And you die when the sand runs out? No. When the sand runs out is when I should die. I will be in the space in between life and the afterlife. Bill, it looked as the thing was riding. I thought it was a proper horse, just very skinny. But it's a skeletal steed. Impressive, but impractical. I had one once, but the head fell off. A bit like flogging the dead horse, I should think. Ha, ha. Most amusing, Miss Flitworth. I think, at a time like this, you can stop calling Miss Flitworth, said Miss Flitworth. Renata? She looked startled. Now, how did you know my name? Oh, you've probably seen it written down, right? Engraved. On one of them hourglasses? Yes. With all them sands of time pouring through? Yes. Everyone's got one? Yes. So you know how long I've... Yes. It must be very odd knowing the kind of things you know. Do not ask me. That's not fair, you know. If we knew when we were going to die, people would lead better lives. If people knew when they were going to die, I think they probably wouldn't live at all. Oh, very gnomic. What do you know about it, Bildor? Everything. Binky trotted up the town's meager handful of streets and over the cobbles of the square. There was no one else around. In cities like Ankh-Morpork, midnight was just late evening, because there was no civic night at all, just evenings fading into dawns. But here people regulated their lives by things like sunsets and mispronounced cockcrows. Midnight meant what it said. Even with the storm stalking the hills, the square itself was hushed. The ticking of the clock in its tower, unnoticeable at midday, now seemed to echo off the buildings. As they approached, something whirred deep in its cog-wheeled innards. The minute hand moved with a clunk and shuddered to a halt on the 9. A trapdoor opened in the clock face, and two little mechanical figures whirred out self-importantly and tapped a small bell with great apparent effort. Ting, ting, ting. The figures lined up and wobbled back into the clock. They've been here ever since I was a girl. Mr. Simnel's great-great-granddad made them, said Miss Flitworth. I always wondered what they did between chimes, you know. I thought they had a little house in there, or something. I don't think so. They're just a thing. They're not alive. Well, they've been there for hundreds of years. Maybe life is something you, sort of acquire? Yes. They waited in silence, except for the occasional thud as the minute hand climbed in the night. It's, been quite nice having you around the place, Mr. Bildor. He didn't reply. Helping me with the harvest and everything. It was interesting. It was wrong of me to delay you just for a lot of corn. No, the harvesting is important. Bildor unfolded his palm. The timer appeared. I still can't figure out how you do that. It is not difficult. The hiss of sand grew until it filled the square. Have you got any last words? Yes, I don't want to go. Well, succinct anyway. Bildor was amazed to find she was trying to hold his hand. Above him, the hands of midnight came together. There was a whirring of the clock. The door opened. The automata marched out. They clicked to a halt on either side of the hour bell, bowed to one another, and raised their hammers. Dong! And then there was a sound of a horse trotting. Miss Flitworth found the edge of her vision filling with purple and blue blotches, like the flashes of after images with no image to come after. If she jerked her head quickly and peered out of the tail of her eye, she could see small gray-clad shapes hovering around the walls. The revenuers, she thought. They've come to make sure it all happens. Bill? She said. He closed his palm over the gold timer. Now it starts. The hoofbeats grew louder and echoed off the buildings behind them. Remember, you are in no danger. Bildor stepped back into the gloom. Then he reappeared momentarily. Probably, he added, and then retreated into the darkness. Miss Flitworth sat down on the steps of the clock, cradling the body of the girl across her knees. Bill? She ventured. A mounted figure rode into the square. It was, indeed, a skeletal horse. Blue flame crackled over the creature's bones as it trotted forward. Miss Flitworth found herself wondering whether it was a real skeleton, animated in some way, something that had once been inside the horse, or a skeletal creature in its own right. It was a ridiculous chain of thoughts to follow, but it was better than dwelling on the ghastly reality that was approaching. Did it get rubbed down, or just given a good polish? Its rider dismounted. It was much taller than Bildor had been, but the darkness of its robe hid any details. It held something that wasn't exactly a scythe, but which might have had a scythe in its ancestry in the same way that even the most cunningly fashioned surgical implement has a stick somewhere in its past. It was a long way from any implement that ever touched a straw. The figure stalked over to Miss Flitworth, scythe over its shoulder, and stopped. Where is he? Don't know who you're talking about, said Miss Flitworth, and if I was you, young man, I'd feed my horse. The figure appeared to have some trouble digesting this information, but finally seemed to reach a conclusion. It unshipped the scythe and looked down at the child. I will find him, it said, but first, it stiffened. A voice behind it said, drop the scythe and turn around slowly. Something within the city, Wendell thought. Cities grow up full of people, but they're also full of commerce and shops and religions and... This is stupid, he told himself. They're just things. They're not alive. Maybe life is something you acquire. Parasites and predators, but not like the sort affecting animals and vegetables. There were some kind of big, slower metaphorical life form living off cities. But they incubate in the cities like those, what are they? Those icky Newman wasp things. He can remember now just as he could remember everything. Reading as a student about creatures that laid their eggs inside other creatures, for months after he refused omelets and caviar, just in case. And the eggs would look like the city in a way, so the citizens would carry them home, like cuckoo eggs. I wonder how many cities died in the past, ringed by parasites like coral reefs surrounded by starfish. They'd have just become empty. They'd lose whatever spirit they had. He stood up. Where's everyone gone, librarian? Ook. Just like them. I'd have done that. Rush off without thinking. May the gods bless them and help them, if they can find the time from their eternal family squabbles. And then he thought, well, what now? I've thought, and what am I going to do? Rush off, of course, but slowly. The center of the heap of trolleys was no longer visible. Something was going on. A pale blue glow hung over the huge pyramid of twisted metal, and there were occasional flashes of lightning deep within the pile. Trolleys slammed into it like asteroids accreting around the core of a new planet, but a few arrivals did something else. They headed for tunnels that had opened within the structure and disappeared into the glittering core. There was a movement at the tip of the mountain, and something thrust its way through the broken metal. It was a glistening spike supporting a globe about 2 meters across. It did nothing very much for a minute or two, and then, as the breeze dried it out, it split and crumbled. White objects cascaded out and were caught by the wind, fountained over Ankh-Morpork and the watching crowds. One of them zigzagged gently across the rooftops and landed at the feet of Wendell Poons as he lurched outside the library. It was still damp, and there was writing on it, at least an attempt at writing. It looked like the strange organic inscription of the snowflake balls, words created by something that was not at all home with words. Sail, sail, sail! Starts tomorrow! Wendell reached the university gateway. People were streaming past. Wendell knew his fellow citizens. They'd go to look at anything. They were suckers for anything written down with more than one exclamation mark on it. He felt someone looking at him and turned. A trolley was watching him from an alleyway. It backed up and whizzed away. "What's happening, Mr. Poons?" said Ludmilla. There was something unreal about the expression of the passers-by. They wore an expression of unbudgeable anticipation. You didn't have to be a wizard to know that something was wrong, and Wendell's senses were whirring like a dynamo. Lupine left at a drifting sheet of paper and brought it to him. "Amazing reductions!" 6 exclamation points. Wendell shook his head sadly. 5 exclamation marks. The sure sign of an insane mind. And then he heard the music. Lupine sat on his haunches and howled. In the cellar under Miss Cake's house, Schleppel the boogeyman paused halfway through his 3rd rat and listened. Then he finished his meal and reached for his door. Count Arthur Winking's Nosferatu was working on the crypt. Personally, he could have lived or relived or unlived or whatever it was he was supposed to be doing without the crypt. But you have to have a crypt. Doreen had been very definite about the crypt. It gave the place a ton, she said. You have to have a crypt and a vault. Otherwise, the rest of the Vampire Society would look down their teeth at you. They never told you about that sort of thing when you started vampiring. They never told you to build your own crypt out of some cheap 2x4 from Chalky the Troll's wholesale building supplies. It wasn't something that happened to most vampires, Arthur reflected. Not your proper vampires. Your actual Count Jugular, for example. No, a toff like him would have someone for it. When the villagers came to burn the place down, you couldn't catch the Count, his own self whipping down the gate to drop the drawbridge. Oh no, he'd just say Igor, as might be. Igor just fort it out. Chop chop. Well, they'd had an advert in Mr. Keeble's job shop for months now. Bed 3 meals a day and hump provided if necessary. Not so much an enquiry. And people said there was all this unemployment around. Made you livid. He picked up another piece of wood and measured it, grimacing as he unfolded the ruler. Arthur's back ached from digging the moat. And that was another thing your posh vampire didn't have to worry about. The moat came with the job, style of the thing. And it went all the way around, because other vampires didn't have the street out in front of them, and old Miss Privy complaining on one side, or the family of trolls Doreen wasn't speaking to on the other, and therefore they didn't just end up with a moat that went across the backyard. Arthur kept falling in it. And then there was the biting the necks of young women, or rather, there wasn't. Arthur was always prepared to see the other person's point of view, but he felt certain young women came into the vampiring somewhere, whatever Doreen said. In diaphanous pegnoirs. Arthur wasn't quite certain what a diaphanous pegnoir was, but he'd read about them and he definitely felt that he'd like to see one before he died, or whatever. And other vampires didn't suddenly find their wives talking with V's instead of W's. The reason being, your natural vampire talked like that anyway. Arthur sighed. It was no life or half-life or afterlife or whatever it was, being a lower middle-class wholesale fruit and vegetable merchant with an upper-class condition. And then the music filtered in through the hole in the wall he'd knocked out to put in the barred window. "Ow!" he said, and clutched at his jaw. "Doreen?" Red Shoe thumped his potable podium. "And let me say we will not lie down and let the grass grow over our heads," he bellowed. "So what is your 7-point plan for equal opportunities with the living? I hear you cry." The wind blew the dried grasses in the cemetery. The only creature apparently paying any attention to Reg was a solitary raven. Red Shoe shrugged and lowered his voice. "You might at least make some effort," he said, to the next world at large. "Here's me wearing my fingers to the bone," he flexed his hands to demonstrate. "And do I hear a word of thanks?" He paused, just in case. The raven, which was one of the extra-large, fat ones that infested the rooftops of the university, put its head on one side and gave Red Shoe a thoughtful look. "You know," said Reg, "sometimes I just feel like giving up." The raven cleared its throat. Red Shoe spun around. "You say one word," he said. "Just one bloody word." And then he heard the music. Ludmilla risked removing her hands from her ears. "It's horrible! What is it, Mr. Poons?" Wendell tried to pull the remains of his hat over his ears. "Don't know," he said. "It could be music, if you'd never heard music before." There weren't notes. There were strung together noises that might have been intended to be notes, put together as one might draw a map of a country that one had never seen. "Yep, Yep, yomp. It's coming from outside the city, said Ludmilla. Where all the people are going. They can't like it, can they? I can't imagine they should, said Wendell. It's just that you remember the trouble with the rats last year. That man who said, the pipe and played music only the rats could hear. Yes, but that wasn't really true. It was all a fraud. It was just the amazing Maurice and his educated rodents. But supposing it could have been true? Wendell shook his head. Music to attract humans? Is that what you're getting at? But that can't be true. It's not attracting us. Quite the reverse, I assure you. Yes, but you're not human exactly, said Ludmilla. And... She stopped and went red in the face. Wendell patted her on the shoulder. Good point, was all he could think of to say. You know, don't you, she said without looking up. Yes, I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of, if that's any help. Mother said it would be dreadful if anyone ever found out. That probably depends on who it is, said Wendell, glancing at Lupine. Why is your dog staring at me like that, said Ludmilla. He's very intelligent. Wendell felt in his pocket, tipped out a couple of handfuls of soil, and unearthed his diary. 20 days to the next full moon. Still, it'd be something to look forward to. The metal debris of the heap started to collapse. Trolleys whirred in around it, and a large crowd of Ankh-Morpork citizens were standing in a big circle, trying to peer inside. The unmusical music filled the air. There's Mr. Dibbler, said Ludmilla, as they pushed their way through the unresisting people. What's he selling this time? I don't think he's trying to sell anything, Mr. Poons. It's that bad? They're probably in lots of trouble. Blue light shone out from one of the holes in the heap. Bits of broken trolley tinkled to the ground like metal leaves. Wendell bent down stiffly and picked up a pointy hat. It was battered and had been run over by a lot of trolleys, but it was still recognizable as something that by rights should be on someone's head. There's wizards in there, he said. Silver light glittered off the metal. It moved like oil. Wendell reached out, and a fat spark jumped across and grounded itself on his fingers. He said. Lots of potential, too. Then he heard the cry of the vampires. Go-wee, Mr. Poons! He turned. The Nosferatus were bearing down on him. We would have been here sooner, only... Couldn't find the blasted collar stud, muttered Arthur, looking hot and flustered. He was wearing a collapsible opera hat, which was fine on the collapsible part, but regrettably lacking in hatness, so that Arthur appeared to be looking at the world from under a concertina. Oh, hello, said Wendell. There's something dreadfully fascinating about the Winking's dedication to accurate vampirism. And who is the young lady? Said Doreen, beaming at Ludmilla. Pardon? Said Wendell. What? Doreen, the Countess asked who she is, Arthur supplied warily. I understood what I said, said Doreen, in a more normal tones of one born and brought up in Ankh-Morpork rather than some Transylvanian fastness. Honestly, if I left it to you, we'd have no standards at all. My name's Ludmilla, said Ludmilla. Charmed, said the Countess Nosferatu graciously, extending a hand that would have been thin and pale if it had not been pink and stubby. Always nice to meet fresh blood. If you ever fancy a dog biscuit when you're out and about, the door is always open. Ludmilla turned to Wendell Poons. It's not written on my forehead, is it? She said. These are a special kind of people, said Wendell gently. I should think so, said Ludmilla levelly. I hardly know anyone who wears an opera cloak the whole time. You've got to have the cloak, said Count Arthur. For the wings, you see, like... He spread the cloak dramatically. There was a brief, implosive noise, and a small, fat bat hung in the air. It looked down, gave an angry squeak, and nosedived onto the soil. Doreen picked it up by its feet and dusted it off. It's having to sleep with the window open all the night that I object to, she said vaguely. I wish they'd stop that music. I'm getting a headache. There was another whoomph. Arthur reappeared upside down and landed on his head. It's the drop, you see, said Doreen. It's like a run-up sort of thing. If he doesn't get at least one story start, he can't get the proper airspeed. I can't get up to the proper airspeed, said Arthur, struggling to his feet. Excuse me, the music doesn't affect you? It puts my teeth on edge is what it does, said Arthur, which is not a good thing for a vampire. Probably don't have to tell you. Mr. Poons thinks it does something to people, said Ludmilla. Sets everybody's teeth on edge, said Arthur. Wendell looked at the crowd. No one was taking any notice of the fresh starters. They look as though they're waiting for something, said Doreen. Waiting, I mean. It's scary, said Ludmilla. Nothing wrong with scary, said Doreen. We're scary. Mr. Poons wants to go inside the heap, said Ludmilla. Good idea. Get them to turn the damn music off, said Arthur. But you could get killed, said Ludmilla. Wendell clapped his hands together and rubbed them thoughtfully. Ah, he said, that's where we're ahead of the game. He walked into the glow. He'd never seen such bright light. It seemed to emanate from everywhere, hunting down every last shadow and eradicating it ruthlessly. It was much brighter than daylight without being anything like it. There was a blue edge to it that cut the vision like a knife. You all right, Count? He said. Fine, fine, said Arthur. Lupine growled. Ludmilla pulled at a tangle of metal. There's something under this, you know. It looks like marble. Orange-colored marble. She ran her hand over it. But warm. Marble shouldn't be warm, should it? It can't be marble. There can't be so much marble in the whole world. World, said Doreen. We tried to get the marble for the vault. She tasted the sound of the word and nodded to herself. The vault, yes. Those dwarfs should be shot. The prices they charge, it's a disgrace. I don't think dwarves built this, said Wendell. He knelt down awkwardly to examine the floor. I shouldn't think so, the lazy little buggers. They wanted nearly $70 to do our vault, didn't they, Arthur? Nearly $70, said Arthur. I don't think anyone built it, said Wendell quietly. Cracks. There should be cracks, he thought. Edges and things where one slab joins another. It shouldn't be all one piece, and slightly sticky. So, Arthur did it himself. I did it myself. Ah, here was an edge. Well, not exactly an edge. The marble became clear, like a window, looking into another brightly lit space. There were things in there, indistinct and melted looking, but no way into them. The chatter of the Winkies flowed over him as he crept forward. More of a vaultlet, really, but he got a dungeon in, even if you have to go in through the hole to shut the door properly. Gentility meant all sorts of things, Wendell thought. To some people, it was not being a vampire. To others, it was a matched set of flying plaster bats on the wall. He ran his fingers over the clear substance. The world here was all rectangles. There were corners, and the corridors were lined on both sides with the clear panels, and the non-music played all the time. It couldn't be alive, could it? Life was more rounded. What do you think, Lupine? Lupine barked. Not a lot of help. Ludmilla knelt down and put a hand on Wendell's shoulder. What do you mean no one built it? She said. Wendell scratched his head. I'm not sure, but I think maybe it was secreted. Secreted? From what? By what? They looked up. A trolley whirred out of the mouth of the side corridor and skidded away down another on the opposite side of the passage. Them? Said Ludmilla. I shouldn't think so. I think they're more like servants, like ants. Bees in a hive, maybe. What's the honey? Not sure, but it's not ripe yet. I don't think things are quite finished. No one touch anything. They walked onward. The passage opened up into a wide, bright, domed area. Stairways led up and down to different floors, and there was a fountain and a grove of potted plants that looked too healthy to be real. Isn't it nice? Said Doreen. I keep thinking there should be people, said Ludmilla. Lots of people. There should at least be wizards, muttered Wendell Poons. Half a dozen wizards don't just disappear. The five of them moved closer. Passages the size of the one they just walked down could have accommodated a couple of elephants walking abreast. Do you think it might be a good idea to go back outside? Said Doreen. What good would that do? Said Wendell. Well, it'd get us out of here. Wendell turned, counting. 5 of the passages radiated equidistantly out of the domed area. And presumably it's the same above and below, he said aloud. It's very clean here, Doreen said nervously. Isn't it clean, Arthur? It's very clean. What's that noise? Said Ludmilla. What noise? That noise, like something sucking something. Arthur looked around with a certain amount of interest. It's not me. It's the stairs, said Wendell. Don't be silly, Mr. Poons. Stairs don't suck. Wendell looked down. These do. They were black like a sloping river. As the dark substance flowed out from under the floor, it humped itself into something resembling steps, which traveled up the slope until they disappeared under the floor again, somewhere above. When the steps emerged, they made a slow, rhythmic schlup-schlup noise, like someone investigating a particularly annoying dental cavity, which is disgusting, by the way. Do you know, said Ludmilla, that's quite possibly the most unpleasant thing I've ever seen? I've seen worse, said Wendell, but it's pretty bad. Shall we go up or down? You want to stand on them? No, but the wizards aren't on this floor, and it's that or slide down the handrail. Have you looked closely at the handrail? They looked at the handrail. I think, said Doreen nervously, that down is more us. They went down in silence. Arthur fell over at the point where the traveling stairs were sucked into the floor again. I had a horrible feeling they were going to drag me under, he said apologetically, and then looked around him. It's big, he concluded, roomy. I could do wonders down here with some stone effect wallpaper. Ludmilla wandered over to the nearest wall. You know, she said, there's more glass than I've seen before, but these clear bits look like shops. Does that make sense? A great big shop full of shops? And it's not ripe yet, said Wendell. Sorry. Just thinking aloud, can you see what the merchandise is? Ludmilla shaded her eyes. It just looks like a lot of color and glitter. Let me know if you see a wizard. Someone screamed. Or here one, for example, Wendell added. Lupine bounded off down a passageway. Wendell lurched swiftly after him. Someone was on their backs, trying desperately to fight off a couple of trolleys. They were bigger than the ones Wendell had seen, with a golden sheen to them. Hey! He yelled. They stopped trying to gore the prone figure, and 3-Point turned on him. Oh, he said, and they got up to speed. The first one dodged Lupine's jaws and butted Wendell full in the knees, knocking him over. As the second passed over him, he reached up wildly, grabbed randomly at the metal, and pulled hard. A wheel spun off the trolley, and the trolley cartwheeled into the wall. He scrambled up in time to see Arthur hanging grimly onto the handle of one of the trolleys as the two of them whirred around in the mad centrifugal waltz. Let it go! Let go! Doreen screamed. I can't! We'll do something. There was a pop of inrushing air. The trolley was suddenly not straining against the weight of a middle-aged wholesale fruit and vegetable entrepreneur, but only against a small, terrified bat. It rocketed into a marble pillar, bouncing off, hit a wall, and landed on its back, wheels spinning. The wheels! Shouted Lamello. Pull the wheels off! I'll do that, said Wendell. You help Reg. Is that Reg down there? Said Doreen. Wendell jerked his thumb towards the distant wall. The words better late than never ended in a desperate streak of paint. Show him a wall and a paint pot, and he doesn't know what world he's in, said Doreen. He's only got a choice of two, said Wendell, throwing the trolley wheels across the floor. Lupine, keep a lookout in case there's any more. The wheels had been sharp, like ice skates. He was definitely feeling tattered around the legs. Now, how did healing go? Red Shoe was helped into his sitting position. What's happening? He said. No one else was coming in. I come down here to see what the music is coming from, and the next thing, there's these wheels. Count Arthur returned to his approximately human form, looked around proudly, realized that no one was paying him any attention, and sagged. They looked a lot tougher than the others, said Ludmilla. Bigger and nastier and covered in sharp edges. Soldiers, said Wendell. We've seen the workers, and now they're soldiers, just like ants. I had an ant farm when I was a lad, said Arthur, who had hit the floor rather heavily and was having a temporary trouble with the nature of reality. Hang on, said Ludmilla. I know about ants. We have ants in the backyard. You have workers and soldiers, then you must also have a... I know, said Wendell. Mind you, they called it a farm. I never saw them doing any farming. Ludmilla leaned against the wall. It'll be somewhere close, she said. I think so, said Wendell. What does it look like, do you think? What you do is you get 2 bits of glass and some ants. I don't know. How should I know? The wizards will be somewhere near it. I don't see why you're bothering about them, said Doreen. They buried you alive just because you were dead. Wendell looked up at the sound of wheels. A dozen warrior baskets turned the corner and pulled up in formation. Hey, we're doing it for the best, said Wendell. People often do. It's amazing the things that seem a good idea at the time. And I think that's where we're going to go ahead and finish up. Things are really starting to come to a head. Like, things speed up a lot towards the end of this. But yeah, I'd say we have probably like 3 more readings and we'll be done. I hope you guys have been enjoying Reaper Man so far. Like I said, it's one of my favorites.